This is counter in Super Smash Bros. Melee, and this is Corrin's counter in Smash 4. Now I know what you're gonna say, they obviously got buffed, but there's no way this was gonna stay this way forever. But this just shows the insane evolution of this move. The first iteration of counter, it was all the way back in Melee, and back then, the move was not really that good. Marth's, for example, did a small amount of percent. The counter window was smaller. Not only did the number of characters who had a counter dramatically increase from each game, especially during Smash 4 and Ultimate, they began to increase dramatically for the characters who had this move. And that would even be seen in breadcrumbs of Wii U's development. Counters in general were getting buffed. This would begin the rise of counters in Smash, and even in Smash Ultimate, where counters sort of became a meme where almost every Fire Emblem character would get one. In Melee, where counters were originated, they obviously are a reference to Fire Emblem's counter mechanics that are obviously prominent in those games. And the first and only two characters who were obviously using this move were Marth and Roy. Marth was seen as a weaker counter attack, did a small amount of damage, only 7%, and the knockback was static no matter what move was being used with it. So it flips the pressure into Marth's favor. With the right placement, this move would actually bring favor back to Marth, and it could allow for him to easily follow up afterward. Although the move had a considerable amount of end lag when missed, so there was a definite risk-reward aspect to this move, it wasn't worth just using this all the time. I mean, you could easily get punished by just simply grabbing. So if you tried to spam it, there was ways around it. And also the counter window is not really that easy to hit, and you can just grab Marth, punish him after it ends. Marth's counter had faster startup, lasted twice as long, but the damage and knockback is always the same no matter what. You know, maybe isn't that best, but there is a small amount of niche usage when it comes to making predictions with this move, as it's definitely not a KO tool, especially in this game. It's mostly used for, reversing a situation. Roy's, however, has a slightly different usage, at least as far as effectiveness goes, actually way more powerful. Roy's was clearly the better tool because it has more knockback, and this made the move slightly better than Marth's. It's the one thing that Roy has over Marth, actually. However, I wouldn't recommend using Roy's counter off stage because of his fastfall speed. He's most likely going to get punished if he uses this move off stage. Marth has the better recovery, and his counter is quicker. He can do follow-ups off stage with it, although, again, easier said than done, I'm sure, for some situations. Also, Roy's has a 1.5 multiplier and a strong attack. Like Game & Watch's fully charged down special, you will actually get one of the strongest special moves in the game. It is incredibly laggy, and it is definitely a slow move. It's unfortunately not as good as future counters and the sequels. For Melee, this is a decent start for Roy. It really is dependent on what Roy is countering for as far as how effective this move is. I wouldn't say it's probably going to KO around 120% depending on the move coming its way, so it is clearly different from Marth's, which is pretty much static almost every single time. Either way, it hits on a 90-degree angle. The fact it can punish smash attacks is kind of nice. In one way, you could say Roy's a little bit better than Marth in this aspect. Now, in Brawl, the counter was actually functionally the same move, although it received a nice little tweak, making it so he could reflect back moves at a 1.1 times multiplier, doing a minimum 8% on the opponent, although you can't reflect projectiles behind Marth like you could in Melee. But despite that, the counter is mostly the same with a buffed multiplier. In my opinion, it's not a super dramatic increase at this point, but it's a nice buff. Now, Ike being introduced in Brawl, he obviously has a counter that is sort of meant to represent what Roy's counter used to be, considering Roy is absent in this game, meaning Ike's counter is actually really strong. Again, similar to Roy, as its startup is slower and its counter attack frames don't come out until frame 5. But its counter window actually lasts a significantly longer period of time compared to Marth's, so while it might not be the best for quick reactions, Ike's is better for maybe a hard read or a smash attack. Ike's multiplier is larger, and it's actually a 1.2 times multiplier, doing a minimum of 10%. While this technically isn't a character with a counter, there is plenty of counter attacks in Smash. And this is the first time where a character outside of the Fire Emblem cast, and maybe one other character that we'll bring up later on in the video. Now, this move's utility is essentially a counter, and obviously it's called Lucario's Double Team. This is when counterattacks became more unique, and you can see Lucario can actually confirm out of Double Team, and he will be sent behind the opponent, and then he can use this to try to gain control, maybe even as a combo starting tool. But this isn't the only time a counter like this has existed in a series. Heck, this is sort of a start starting of the Pokemon characters getting similar down specials that are basically counters. Brawl Double Team is a pretty moderate attack considering Lucario we were talking about. The strength of the attack is obviously going to be dependent on his aura, and obviously it starts out a weak attack at only 7% on the low end, but on the high end with aura you can actually potentially KO with this move. In Brawl, this move became one of the longest counter windows in the game, and even in Smash 4 it's still the longest. It's even one of the fastest counters. However, the drawback is the animation is very long, and if you mispredict with this counter you have 40 frames where you have to wait. It would start a trend where down Bs and counters would sort of become more common in Smash, and ironically a lot of Pokemon characters are going to be getting them. Even in Smash 4 and Ultimate, the number of these moves is going to increase dramatically. We definitely have to talk about counters in this game. This is the elephant of the room of this video. This is the purpose of why I wanted to create this video, was the buffs to counter in Smash 4 were massive. This was a very controversial thing for some people. Now I'm sure some of you guys in the comments can let me know what you truly think about counter getting universally buffed in Smash 4. This was one of the biggest changes to a lot of these special moves in this series. They made counters actually kind of good, and I'm not just saying that. A lot of them got buffed across the board. And the purpose of this philosophy was to try to make these counters more usable, try to make them better, because, you know, obviously in Melee they were a little bit more gimmicky. If you look all the way back with Marth and Roy, especially in those games, mostly the tool is used for hard raids. You're not really going to kill with it. Even if you do, that's going to be a rare situation. In this game though, however, they made a lot of these tools into KO moves. Counter not only became more aggressive as a tool, but they also became more common. A lot more characters were getting counters slapped onto their moveset, and this just how common it was. And I'm not gonna lie, I personally was not for these buffs because Smash 4 produced some of the most broken counters you'll probably ever see in the series. And this move is gonna have now a 1.2 times multiplier instead of a 1.1. So now he has Ike's counter, basically. His same multiplier that Ike had in Brawl. The difference is pretty massive from Marth. His counter is normally supposed to be the weaker counter, the speedier one. Now he can sort of comfortably kill with it at higher percentages. Lucina was added as a clone to Marth, and they have the same exact multiplier as well. That's one extra counter that's in the game. Ike's counter window was made longer, and he has 1 frame less vulnerable at the startup of it, but it's still buffed. Most characters begin to receive counterattacks like Shulk, gaining Vision as his down special. It's one of the longest counter windows in the game. You can even KO with this bad boy. It's that good. If you counter a hitbox, it can deal at least 35%, and it's one of the strongest counters in the game, knockback wise. I mean, just imagine with his Smash Monado. And of course, Shulk can actually perform directional inputs out of Vision, so it's a little bit more deeper utility wise compared to the other counters. When I was a kid, I actually thought this was random, and I used to pocket Shulk during Smash 4. I thought you weren't even allowed to turn around with this move, but hey, the more you know. Because of this counter beginning at frame 7 and lasting until frame 35, this is a very solid tool. Although the move has sour spot hitboxes, and if you spam the move, Vision will actually have shorter counter windows. So you have to wait 15 seconds in order to use it again to get out of the old counter window. And I'm sure they did that to try to limit spamming. I mentioned the other Pokemon get counters. Greninja is one of them, having a down special that is Substitute. The move is actually functionally very similar to Lucario's down special, but Greninja's can be controlled in 8 directions after a confirmed successful counter. If aimed downward, Greninja can actually Meteor Smash with it. So these moves are starting to get kind of good utility-wise. However, this move's counter window is smaller and it has a high amount of end lag and slow startup. Palutena has a counter as well, and she was a new character in this game. I'm not gonna lie, this counter was really bad, but hey, it exists. It's not one of the better ones KO-wise either, but it does get buffed in Ultimate. All in all, the move has low knockback and it has sour spot hitboxes, and it's actually the weakest counter in the whole game. And it has one of the longest startup animations out of all the counters, not being until frame 10, and it has a high amount of end lag too, so I really don't know what they were doing here, but hey, whatever, I guess. This counter really sucks. Its entire animation is 75 frames, and it's way too long despite the counter having a 1.3 times damage multiplier. Its knockback is so minor, it just really sucks. Little Mac's down special is Slip Counter, where he will move forward on a confirmed counter input. What's cool about this move is you can actually use it as a potential recovery tool, which God knows he's going to need it. It can counter and reflect moves and projectiles, and it's actually the fastest counter in the game, so he does have that going for him. And its counter window is a 1.3 times multiplier, and in Ultimate it becomes even more powerful, becoming a 1.5 multiplier. Mii Sword Fighter has a counter, the move does a 1.25 multiplier in damage. It's not one of the most iconic counters in the game, but hey, it exists. Roy came back in this game as DLC, and he would actually get a big bigger damage multiplier to his counter. And it's actually one of the most highest damaging counters in the game. It was definitely buffed, obviously, having more knockback and having more counter frames and range. Bayonetta Witch Time. When a successful counter is achieved in Witch Time, it will actually dramatically slow down the opponent, allowing Bayonetta to choose what she wants to do to punish the opponent. And oh boy, we already know what's gonna happen. Meaning she can smash attack them, she can kill them with one of her KO setups, maybe even her KO throws, she can kill them off the top. Whatever your mind could think of with Bayonetta, it works in this game. She can literally counter even projectiles. It's basically a stronger version of the timer item. They'll stay still for a long period of time, and then all Bayonetta has to do is punish them. It is a super slimy KO tool, and it's low-key one of the best KO tools in the game. It's obviously the best counter in a lot of people's opinions. It's when they start to get silly at this point, because this is really going beyond the boundaries of the original iteration of Marth's counter in Melee, where you can actually just take a stock off of a confirmed counter. It used to be, hey, you get a small amount of advantage for getting a confirmed counter. Now you can easily just grab the opponent and kill them. It even grants intangibility on this move. It's really silly. Sure, the smash attack performed out of the Witch Time is weaker, but it still doesn't stop this move being insanely good. You can do many things out of this attack. And technically, you can activate the bats within. It has counter frames, so you can run away and Bayo can travel in different directions and use this tool to escape pressure and have the incoming attacks damage. So not only is it a counter, but it's a tool where she can escape out of pressure. And it has a 1.2 times multiplier, but tones down to a 1.1 times multiplier. So not only is this tool already a Swiss Army knife tool, but you can use this to escape out of pressure, and the move's 1.2 times multiplier would be toned down to a 1.1 times multiplier, which would make this a harder tool to KO with. It still is a strong tool, even after being nerfed in Ultimate. Corrin's Counter Surge. This is one of the most broken counters in Smash. And when I first made this video, I made sure I wanted to talk about this topic. Remember when counters used to be basic and very formulaic? Well, yeah, they can kill. Just straight off of one hit. So what's the big deal? Well, this counter is very different from the other counters, as the way it sends the opponent directly upward makes it really rewarding. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, for a couple of reasons. One was this move had a massive 1.3 times multiplier, and it sent directly upward into the blast zone, and it could KO really early because of this. The big reason is in Smash 4's engine, blast zones are a lot lower in this game, and it's a big puzzle piece on why this counter was so strong early on. It could KO to 0 to 10%, depending on the smash attack it is countering, which truly shows how strong counters have become at this point. They've become this powerful, and this made this tool a strong KO option. This move was way overcooked in my opinion, and this is why the devs obviously agreed, because in future updates, they would actually nerf this move considerably and make it deal a 1.2 times multiplier, more in line with the other counters in the game, which is why I state how crazy changing one number can make a counter so good. In Smash Ultimate, a lot of counters would be nerfed like Bayonetta's, but many more would just be introduced. People could see characters with counters more commonly in the game. It was becoming a meme at this point. Chrom was introduced as an Echo Fighter, and he received a counter, sharing Roy's 1.35 damage multiplier. Me Brawler has a new counter down special, having low amounts of end lag, but it's very fast, but its counter window is really small. Its counter detection is actually the shortest window in the game, which is actually pretty bad. It was definitely really weird and kind of a meme move, but whatever, it exists. You have to stand directly in front of Me Brawler in order for it to work, and it has one of the highest damage multipliers in the game, being a 1.5 times damage multiplier, but it's a really weird counter, as people have made whole videos on how bad this move truly is. King K-Rool's down special reflects direct attacks, and you can reflect projectiles. Its damage multiplier is actually high, being 1.5, and it has frames of intangibility being 9 frames. But the move does have a high amount of lag. However, it obviously is more used in niche situations because it has 34 frames of end lag, but it actually is really slow, and you can actually punish King K-Rool if he messes up, obviously. Incineroar's Revenge is a bit more unique, where Incineroar will sponge a incoming attack, and Incineroar will build up damage that could be used for the next attack that Incineroar will actually land. Joker's follows a similar format where he can sponge hits with his down special because it has armor on it, and this will actually help him build his meter. Then once Arsene is fully active, will gain a more standard counter that can actually beat attacks and projectiles, and it's a 1.6 damage multiplier. And it also has one of the most damaging dealing counters in the game, and it has the largest hitboxes as well, so it's definitely a really rewarding tool. Sephiroth's counter is probably one of the most unique counters in the game, as it triggers even when Sephiroth is not attacked, which makes it, I guess, more similar to Ryu's down special, which is technically not a traditional counter. It gets stronger the more damage that it accumulates, and it doesn't reflect projectiles, but it can stop them, and it can even break as well. Sora's down special is more similar to other counters in the game, as it can reflect projectiles and attacks. It deals a 1.5 multiplier to direct attacks, and this does not apply to the reflected projectiles though. Sora will simply claim the incoming attack and deal a 1.4 times damage multiplier. Its trigger hitbox is actually pretty large for Sora, so he has that going for him, and it can do 30%. Oh, honest content, you dummy, you forgot Peach and Daisy. Well, technically, they are actually the very first counter added to Smash. However, I saved them for the very end because it's a very weak attack. It's not really that good even when activated, and it's not technically Peach's down special, it's a neutral special, so technically you could say it's different from a Marth's counter, but to be honest, both of them existed all the way back in Melee. Is really what these counters are all inspired by, being down special, meaning this version of this move inspired many other iterations that we talked about in this video. But Peach technically does exist, it's just not very good. It's not supposed to be a KO tool, it's one of the weakest counters in the game, but it does work as a projectile as well. It's really laggy, it's weak, it only deals 3% on hit, and you're most likely not going to KO with it ever. Drop a clip of you KOing with it, I actually want to see that. It's probably going to be really cool, I'm not gonna lie. But if you were in the comments saying, hey, you forgot about this, checkbait, baby. The point of this video though was to show the rise of counter and how it started as a niche attack all the way back in Melee. Technically, I guess now 3 characters having it, including Peach's neutral B. It is one of the only moves in the game where it was buffed this significantly and was given to so many more characters. It wasn't until Smash 4 where they would actually give massive buffs to the move and made it much more common, with 13 characters having it in the game. And then in Ultimate bringing it up to 21 characters who have counters. Some of the most powerful counters can be seen here. And I'm sure in the next Smash game there's going to be more counters. It sort of has become a borderline meme in a way, where people can sort of guess if there's a new character coming, they're more than likely going to have a down special that's probably a counter, especially if they're a Fire Emblem character. It's a very high chance. It wasn't until Smash 4 where they really decided to make this move a lot better and make it into a KO tool for so many characters. A lot of the cheapest versions of counter existed in this game. Either way, that's the video. Let me know how you guys feel about counters. Thank you guys for watching the video. There is a Patreon down below if you guys want to get videos early. Hopefully you're doing well. All right, take care, peace.